Hello and welcome. This is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. I'm Larry Rhodes.
And I'm Joe Barnhart, and we want you to know if you don't believe there's a God, you shouldn't be alone. If you do believe, you shouldn't be alone. Welcome to this program. Here in East Tennessee, you can find a free-thinking atheists and agnostics, and it's a show for them and others who want to have a good, open discussion, and free of supernatural beliefs.
This is a call-in show. Please take note of the number at the bottom of the screen and feel free to call in at any time during the show.
And on the first and third Sunday mornings, the Rationalists of East Tennessee have monthly activities, round table discussion, and on the second Sunday is a book club discussion, and fourth Sundays they gather for reflections and potluck.
And that's usually at a member's home.
Member's home,
The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun meetup that often meets at a bar or restaurant. Tonight's meetup is at Barley's Taproom and Pizzeria for happy hour after the show for food, drink, and conversation. To find us, look for the silver-jacketed copy of The God Delusion standing upright on the table.
Okay, now today is December 10, 2013, and we're going to talk about self-fulfillment and concern for others. We're approaching the holiday season, the time of gift season. That is long tradition. And we want to wish the people out there a joyous time.
Right. Happy holidays. Now, hearkening back to that long time ago, how did Christmas come to be celebrated on December 25th? It's a strange and dark story. Roman pagans first introduced the holiday of Saturnalia, a week-long period of lawlessness celebrated between December 17th and 25th. During this period, Roman courts were closed, and Roman law dictated that no one could be punished for damaging property or injuring people during this week-long celebration. The festival began when Roman authorities chose, quote, an enemy of the Roman people to represent the Lord of Misrule. Now this was an innocent. This was not a person that they had in jail or something like that. Each Roman community selected a victim whom they forced to indulge in food and other physical pleasures throughout the week. At the festival's conclusion on December 25th, Roman authorities believed that they were destroying the forces of darkness by brutally murdering this innocent man or woman.
As a matter of fact, there were other cultures who did something like
that.
Yeah, and what was thought to be progress is when they started killing animals for sacrifice rather than killing human beings. That was considered to be.
That's a step up.
That was a step up.
Not for the animals, but for
and then some of the rabbis developed the notion that instead of giving God all this meat, which always
went to the priest
anyhow, they turned prayers into sacrifices or good works and good deeds.
Yeah, but we're still supporting the priests. I mean, they don't actually do any labor as far as that goes. But
well, a lot of them do
hunt,
a lot of counseling and a lot of visitation.
Produce anything. I guess that you could say they do counseling.
Oh yeah, a lot of them do counseling and visitation, people in the hospitals, and
well, that's good. At least that's evolved over time. It sure beats dancing around the fire with a mask on.
Oh yeah, that's way beyond that now.
And the reason that we can't do this anymore, the government can't select an individual, an innocent, to be murdered at the end of the week, is because we have a Bill of Rights. And today is pretty close to the anniversary, December 15th, of when the Bill of Rights was actually ratified. The United States of America might never have existed without one thing, the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights limits the power of the government and protects the rights of the people. It was so important that several of the original 13 states would not ratify the Constitution without it. Nearly everything that makes an American proud to be one comes from the Bill of Rights. Freedoms to speak, print, read, assemble, pray, petition the government, keep and bear arms. Protections from unreasonable arrests and searches, excessive bails, double jeopardy, coerced confessions, cruel and unusual punishments. rights to due process and jury trials, counsel in the presence of a defense witness. These are freedoms and rights that are defining in America. Surprisingly, Americans do not celebrate the foundation of our political freedoms, the Bill of Rights, but we should. After all, the Bill of Rights is part of our Constitution, and it is what our military people pledge to serve and die for. It is uniquely American. People on the political left, center, and right can all rally around the Bill of Rights because it isn't an expression of our shared basic values. On December 15th, the Bill of Rights was ratified. That was in 1791, and has since protected American citizens for 206 years. We should celebrate December 15th every year. We should call for the president to maybe designate a day. By officially designating it as Bill of Rights Day, we would be reminding our fellow citizens and younger generations of our heritage. Bill of Rights Day would declare America's commitments to civil and human rights throughout the world. The special day would annually remind politicians, bureaucrats, prosecutors, and judges that their authority and power are limited, and the government serves us, Americans. It does not rule us. December 15th, Bill of Rights Day, reminds us that the liberty we have and what it costs to keep it. By celebrating Bill of Rights Day every year, perhaps we shall never forget. On this day, also, moving to a famous free thinker,
William Lord,
on this date, in 1805, anti-cleric and early abolitionist William Lloyd Garrison was born in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and apprenticed to a newspaper at age 13. He took up the abolition cudgels early and sued for libel by the owner of a slave ship. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 months in prison and served 7 weeks. Garrison, the 50th anniversary of our country, wrote, "There is one theme which should be dwelt upon till our whole country is free from the curse, slavery." He founded the Liberator in Boston on January 1st, 1831, and in its pages he vowed, in earnest, "I in earnest will not equivocate, I will not excuse, I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard." He was an ardent women's rights man and a proponent of early suffragists. Garrison and other abolitionists, freethinkers, and women's rights advocates called for a 4-day Bible convention for the purpose of freely and fully canvassing the authority and influence of the Jewish and Christian scriptures in June 1853. More than 2,000 attended the event by Melodeon Hall in Hartford, Connecticut. A majority of them were hostile, including 700 divinity students. Garrison described the rebel as like a troop of demons let loose in the pit, according to the history of women's suffrage. In 1854, he pointed out at the Women's Suffrage Convention that the most determined opposition it encounters is from the clergy generally, whose teachings of the Bibles are intensely inimical to the equality of woman with man. And white man with black man, for that matter. The resolution was inspired by an attempt to bar The resolution was inspired by an attempt to bar atheist friend Ernest L. Rose from presiding over the convention, a maneuver squelched by Susan B. Anthony. Garrison was not a churchgoer or believer in orthodoxy, although he was a deist. The last issue of the Liberator was published in 1865, right at the end of the war. Garrison remained active in progressive causes, especially suffrage. He died in 1879. And we have a quote from him. "Why go to the Bible about women's suffrage? What question was ever settled by the Bible? What question of theology or any other department? The human mind is greater than any book. The mind sits in judgment on every book. If there is truth in the book, we take it. If error, we discard it. Why refer this to the Bible? In this country, the Bible has been used to support slavery and capital punishment, while in the old centuries it had been quoted to sustain all manner of tyranny and persecution. All reforms are anti-Bible." Is that the truth?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. In early Christianity, before the Bible was written, while it was being written, I mean, it took many years from many sources, in fact, there were more Christian literature than we like to imagine. And so centuries later, there was an attempt to weed out some in order to have what was called a canon. But at the time the weeding out process took place, you had the males dominating. So they left in those scriptures that permitted discrimination against women. After all, these were male bishops, not women in the clergy anymore. And so they simply weeded out all the literature that was pro-women or pro-equality. Now there were some that got left in because apparently they didn't understand it that well. But the New Testament in particular, you would expect to have more equality.
You'd think
and
so.
There was at that time, but it got weeded out in the 3rd and 4th
And
centuries.
it's been flavoring politics ever since, religion and politics
is
ever
a
since.
big issue of that. And by the way, since our theme is self-fulfillment and caring for others, and that's why we like to celebrate Christmas. Christmas was originally a Roman, and I mean, it has it's like a river, like the Tennessee River. You don't say that the Tennessee River started here because there's so many streams flowing
the
in.
Nile or any other
into
major river.
yeah. And even when it gets down to Louisiana at the Delta, then it becomes several more rivers. So that's the way Christianity has been. It's many streams pouring in. And at one time in Christianity, you had the Puritans. And the Puritans were up in New England in the 17th century, were opposed to Christmas. Because
some Christian sects are still.
oh yeah, Jehovah's Witnesses, for example.
Okay.
Did we have a call in already? Let's see what we got.
Well, you're a professor of religious studies, and a retired professor of religious studies and philosophy as well, aren't you? Okay. Well, very cool. So we're going to take this call.
Go ahead,
Can we have
please.
a name or a nickname, please? You're on the air.
Yeah, this is Charles from Central Illinois.
Okay,
Charles.
Charles.
I've called in before.
Do you have a comment or a question?
One of the things I wanted to note was that one of the reasons why they had such problems with the Gospels and deciding what was valid and was not, that there had been 2 major revolts against Roman rule in the Middle East, around Jerusalem, around what was then the Israel people, one in 33 AD and one in 66 AD. There was a lot of mass destruction and death.
Yeah.
And Josephus was a revolutionary against the Romans until he realized that, hey, this isn't going to win and I'm going to wind up dead, and he switched sides. So things got edited out after these wars that wouldn't suit the new dominant society that was emerging, that had to submit to what the Romans wanted to, or they'd go extinct. And the Romans were extremely patriarchal in many respects.
Yes, they were. And part of we have to say, part of the Hebrew tradition was very patriarchal too. So you got a lot of that in what's called the Old Testament, a lot of it. So when the Christians selected the Old Testament, and they selected many of them what they wanted, and they eliminated. I mean, all cultures do this. It's simply important to see. I mean, we do it. We're saying some things are more useful than others, and more moral than others.
I think the important point to make here, though, is that most believers don't think that the men or the people who are writing the Bible influenced the Bible so merely as much as God did. The point that you're making and our caller is making is that the Bible was written by men,
by human beings,
by men living in a male-dominated society, and was edited by male-oriented societies. Since then, it wasn't the Word of God because God being so misogynistic and misogynistic.
It was human beings.
It was human beings doing this.
Yes. So All literature.
Now,
Go ahead.
also, in that era, there was multiple different versions of Christianity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Nestorian, Arianism, what was now Orthodox Catholicism. And the one that backed the right person that became the Roman Emperor became the dominant version of Christianity. And that Roman Emperor was Theodosius.
Yeah,
He issued a decree nullifying the decree of Milan, or the Milan, which was for tolerance between all the various religions, and said it's the people that back his way, or it's death by torture, or I send you off to the Russian equivalent of a Roman version of a Russian gulag.
Yes, the important thing to remember is that they didn't have church-state separation. So a lot of politics, especially after Constantine. Constantine was the Roman power, and he simply adopted Christianity and put them together.
On his deathbed at that.
Yeah.
Well, almost. What he did was that he legitimized it, and then issued the decree of Milan, which was, hey, everybody get along or else. And right after the resolved the Council of Nicaea, where he issued an order to getting all the various and sundry different Christian leaders together to resolve the issue that looked like was going to cause a civil war, which was the nature of Christ. Was he man and God? Was he a unique singular being? Was he a man that was simply inspired by God, or what? He went off to participate in the dedication to a temple to the pagan god.
Perfection, in giving to us Augustus Caesar, whom Providence filled with virtue for the welfare of mankind, and who, being sent to us and to our descendants as a Savior, has put an end to war and set all things in order, and whereas, having become visible as God on earth, and the birthday of God, Augustus Caesar, has been for the whole world the beginning of the gospel. The word there is, in the Greek, is euangelion. It's the same word in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and in the epistles of Paul. In other words, the word gospel, from which we get the word evangel, take that U and turn it into a V, evangel. Euangelion is the gospel of Augustus Caesar. And what I think happened, well, it says, whom Jupiter appointed as instrument of our atonement, put on in the mortal shape of a young Roman. And then finally it says in this ode to Caesar, delay thy homeward skyward journey. And I still remember in the book of Acts, the picture of Jesus ascending right up into the sky. Yeah. And what I think is the early Christians took this, and I've got to say this for them. They took this, and this is Jesus. And they, instead of turning Jesus into a Roman ruler, they made him a little baby in a manger, which is a trough which you feed the cows. In other words, they took humility and did a parody on this and made this little baby Jesus into a deity that'll eventually go up to the sky. And I think that's why many of the poor were attracted to Christianity for that reason. Now, every culture has its myths, and that was simply taking one myth of Caesar and doing another one, and it had a moral improvement, it seems to me. It's not a scientific theory.
Well, who was it said that that people make gods so inexpensive and plentiful? The thing about it is, people are still making gods.
Sure.
As recently as World War II, the Emperor of Japan was considered a god. And even now as we speak, North Korea, their leader is a god. The thing about it is, he's not he's not the president of the country. That would be Kim Jong-il, I think it was the father, and he's dictating from beyond the grave. And he and Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-sung, the middle one who just died, are all considered deities. And
this has an ancient tradition going back at least to the Greeks, who had all kinds of gods running everywhere. And some of them would marry and some wouldn't. In the Christian tradition, they wouldn't let their god marry. They could have a virgin birth, but that had to be a miracle, of course.
But in the Abrahamic, they can't have more than one God, and that God is the God. So the ones that they create nowadays are prophets and saints.
Oh yeah, so, the saints really took the place of the many gods, so they can pray to the saints.
But they still have supernatural powers, and live in the supernatural plane and watch over us all.
Well, Saturn was considered to be, well, they had the ceremony. What was it called? The Saturnalis, or Saturnalis, was a famous feast in honor of the god Saturn. And that, by the way, was a feast in which people gave gifts to each other. And the churches then gradually took that over as part of their custom. In other words, Christmas is really a takeover of many of the traditions from other cultures.
In particular, pagan, but other cultures for sure.
And I have an atheist friend who doesn't even like the word humanist. But I think a good atheist will be able to borrow some of the good things from other cultures and subcultures. And in other words, say you and I differ on some things, that doesn't mean I can't borrow from you.
Borrow the good things. As an example, there's an atheist church movement going around the world right now called Sunday Assembly, and they realize that the church has an awful lot of good things going for it. The fact that they assemble, they get together, they sing, they have pageants, plays. They just it's people getting together to celebrate life, but for physical well-being.
That's a cruel thing to do, it seems to me.
Solitary confinement.
And I'm glad you raised the notion of Christians, because in our culture, it seems to me we still have the old hang-up of we ought to sacrifice something to the gods. And the prison system seems to be more punishment than trying to find a way to correct, and using an old religious term that ought to have secular meaning is redeem, in the sense change people.
And remedial. I mean, they used to use that term all the time when they talk about sending people to college, to prison. We're going to teach them a lesson. We're going to teach them that it hurts society when you act against society, and we will give them new trades. We'll give them training. We'll give them what they need to set up a new life when they get out. Nowadays, it's tending to be more just plain old punishment.
And that's not, would you agree, that's not to our self-interest?
No, it's not. As a society, it's not. But think of the parallel between that and hell. There's no remedial effect at all to hell. God, of course, is putting you there, or as the religious right would have you say, you're putting yourself there. But it's just for the purpose of pain forever. No redeeming value at all. It's just you've done wrong. You're going to be burned forever and ever and ever, and there's nothing good come out of it.
Well, I remember asking a fundamentalist Christian. I said, wouldn't you at least settle for annihilation instead of torture? And he couldn't. And I said, well, this means you're wicked. You want to punish people. I mean, just for the heck of it. And I think that's a miserable way to be.
One thing that always gets me about it is God and Jesus are omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, so they know all the crimes that are about to take place, all the pedophile priests that are about to rape children, all the bad that's going to happen caused by other humans, and they just stand around and let it happen. And of course, apparently they observe it all. Now, in American legal society, legal traditions, laws. If you know of a crime before it happens and you don't report it and you don't do anything about it to prevent the crime, you're guilty of accessory and you can be sent to prison for that.
Well, fortunately, the Pope is beginning to wake up to this.
No, I'm not talking about Jesus and God, though. They're the biggest accessories of all time. But
well, you know, you've got a really good point.
Don't credit them with that type of thing.
Now, you could say, well, if a parent knows, if you were a parent, and let's say you're going to be a parent, and you know that your child is going to be doing all kinds of horrible crimes and end up in everlasting misery, would you bring that child into existence? Or would you practice birth control?
Right.
I'd practice birth control. I read a paper once in New Mexico. Does the Lord, God of the universe, practice birth control? Trying to argue this whole point that this makes no sense.
Well, if you follow the religious tradition, the Christian tradition, right to its end, there was recently, well, a few years ago, this woman who killed all 5 of her children while they were like before the age of reason to prevent them from going to hell, because she thought if they got to be to the age of reason, they could sin and end up in hell. But she killed them all first, so it just follows from the religious tradition that that's the thing to do.
Like there was a tradition.
Because then she could ask for forgiveness and get in herself.
And in fact, I was going to point out in connection with this, that among the Presbyterians, the debate as to whether or not an unbaptized infant would go to hell, or at least limbo or hell. And for a Catholic, it'd be limbo. And in America, the Presbyterians decided, no, they go straight to heaven. And that's what this woman was about, just send them straight to heaven.
The thing about it is, limbo was done away with a few years ago by the Catholic Church.
Isn't that interesting?
I mean, for centuries, women were told that their dead children were in limbo, and all of a sudden, poof, it's gone.
Part of the reason
they say the science changes, Christian religion changes too.
Their thinking on that was in limbo. And that's true of all of us. Sometimes we just don't know what to do on that idea, and we leave it in limbo. But that's different, leaving people in limbo. Well, let's move on with this notion of fortunately, on the December the 21st, and you may be going to what do you call it, the 21st?
The
solstice party.
Solstice
and
party.
my wife and I are really looking forward to that, and we're going to maybe take our granddaughter if we get her invited. But it's just people getting together just to share their joy and happiness. And Christmas parties are often this way, if they're sensible. And people realize that joy is a major part of being human. And I think this is why people like dogs, because a dog can bring you a lot of joy. And so maybe we should try to emphasize the importance, whether you're holding to a religion or you're a secularist, we should all agree that joy and happiness is a major concern of being human. And then discipline and self-discipline and self-control is for the sake of having more joy. It's not just to punish yourself.
But all the time that Mother Teresa was doing her thing, she was telling everybody that suffering was holy.
Well, she was also opposed to birth control, which, with all the poverty going around, that seemed to make no sense to me. There's a good example of a church dogma getting in the way with human decency, it seems to me.
Exactly.
Now, I don't want to get into the ridiculous position that say all religion is all bad. I'm just trying to say that all views need to be aware of the need for improvement, including my own view.
The possibility of harm that they may do.
And maybe don't even realize it at the time.
Well, we're getting down to the middle of the hour, so we should probably take a mid-program break. In case you're just tuning in, this is Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Shows are live every Tuesday from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock Eastern Time on this Community Access TV, and also streaming online outside of the Knoxville area. To see that, go to ctvknox.org. This is a call-in show, and we're live today, December 10th. Viewers can call the number on the screen, bottom of the screen. The Atheist Society of Knoxville, or ASK, meets 2 times a week, and we have evening meetups for food, drink, and conversation. ASK's purpose is to supply a venue for community, camaraderie, and outreach to atheists, agnostics, freethinkers, and other like-minded people in the East Tennessee area. The Rationalists of East Tennessee has Sunday activities involving lively presentations and discussions of subjects topical and timeless. Once a month they get together for a book club, but you need not have read the book to attend. But of course it helps.
Yeah, they have a social outlet.
Sam, would you mind running the informational videos that we have on those 2 organizations?
Do you prefer the scientific method over supernatural beliefs? Are you concerned about religious leaders and organizations imposing their values and rules on your body, your family, and the rest of our society? Well, take comfort in the fact that you're not alone. The Rationalists of East Tennessee meets weekly for fellowship and provides a forum for people who support skeptical thinking and rational discussion of these and other issues. To find out more information or to find out about our next meeting, visit us on the web at www.rationalist.org. If you live in or around the Knoxville area and are questioning your religious beliefs or simply believe in one less God than everyone else, well, you're not alone. The Atheist Society of Knoxville is a fun and friendly group of people just like you that meets twice a week at a bar or restaurant. We meet every Tuesday night following the show at Barley's Tap Room and Pizzeria for happy hour. You'll find our group either inside or on the patio. Look for Richard Dawkins' silver-jacketed book, The God Delusion, standing upright on the table. On Fridays, we meet at Agave Azul or the Beard and Beer Market. But if you plan to preach, proselytize, provoke, or punch, please don't. We all question what we believe at one point in our lives. If this is the time for you, come join us for food, drink, conversation, and fun. Do you find stories of talking snakes laughable?
Are we back on the...
Are we back on now? We're back. Okay, where'd we leave off, Joe?
Well, I want to... This is from a friend of mine. Who wrote this book, and I want to read a passage. This is about the Provincial Assembly in Asia Minor passed a resolution in honor of Augustus Caesar. Now, let me see what you think of this. Whereas, and this is the resolution, whereas Providence, which has guided our whole existence and shown us care and liberality, has brought our life to the peak of perfection in giving to us Augustus Caesar, whom Providence filled with virtue for the welfare of mankind, and who, being sent to us and to our descendants as a Savior, has put an end to war and set all things in order, and whereas, having become visible as God on earth, and the birthday of God, Augustus Caesar, has been for the whole world the beginning of the gospel. The word there is, in the Greek, is euangelion. It's the same word in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and in the epistles of Paul. In other words, the word gospel, from which we get the word evangel, take that U and turn it into a V, evangel. Euangelion is the gospel of Augustus Caesar. And what I think happened, well, it says, whom Jupiter appointed as instrument of our atonement, put on in the mortal shape of a young Roman. And then finally it says in this ode to Caesar, delay thy homeward skyward journey. And I still remember in the book of Acts, the picture of Jesus ascending right up into the sky. Yeah. And what I think is the early Christians took this, and I've got to say this for them. They took this, and this is Jesus. And they, instead of turning Jesus into a Roman ruler, they made him a little baby in a manger, which is a trough which you feed the cows. In other words, they took humility and did a parody on this and made this little baby Jesus into a deity that'll eventually go up to the sky. And I think that's why many of the poor were attracted
Oh, sure.
to Christianity for that reason. Every culture has its myths, and that was simply taking one myth of Caesar and doing another one, and it had a moral improvement, it seems to me. It's not a scientific theory.
Well, who was it said that that people make gods so inexpensive and plentiful?
Yeah,
the thing about it is, people are still making gods.
Sure.
As recently as World War II, the Emperor of Japan was considered a god. And even now as we speak, North Korea, their leader is a god. The thing about it is, he's not the president of the country. That would be Kim Jong-il. I think it was the father, and he's dictating from beyond the grave. And he and Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-sum, the middle one, the one who just died, are all considered deities. And
this has an ancient tradition going back at least to the Greeks, who had all kinds of gods running everywhere. And some of them would marry and some wouldn't. In the Christian tradition, they wouldn't let their god marry. They could have a virgin birth, but that had to be a miracle, of course.
But in the Abrahamic, they can't have more than one god, and that God is the God. So the ones that they create nowadays are prophets and saints.
Oh yeah, the saints really took the place of the many gods, so they can pray to the saints.
But they still have supernatural powers, and live in the supernatural plane and watch over us all.
Well, Saturn was considered to be, well, they had the ceremony. What was it called? The Saturnalis or Saturnalis was a famous feast in honor of the god Saturn, and that, by the way, was a feast in which people gave gifts to each other, and the churches then gradually took that over as part of their custom. In other words, Christmas is really a takeover of many of the traditions from other cultures.
In particular, pagan, but other cultures for sure.
And I have an atheist friend who doesn't even like the word humanist, but I think a good atheist will be able to borrow some of the good things from other cultures and subcultures. And in other words, say you and I differ on some things, that doesn't mean I can't borrow from you.
Borrow the good things. As an example, there's an atheist church movement going around the world right now called Sunday Assembly, and they realize that the church has an awful lot of good things going for them. The fact that they assemble, they get together, they sing, they have pageants, plays. They just it's people getting together to celebrate life, but they throw out the dogma. They throw out any hint of religion, dictatorship. Any of that is not authoritarian. It's just people getting together and enjoying life. And of course, church, a lot of that is what church is all about. But the part that, of course, we have a problem with is the dogma and the supernatural.
In fact, that's what the history of churches has been. That's why there's so many of them, because they couldn't accept somebody else's dogma. And so invented a new one.
And religions, if one thing they're very, very good at is splitting. Somebody gets a different interpretation, boom, they're gone. The thing about sciences tend to come together all around the world, no matter what society you're in. If you're a scientist and you have the right tools, you're going to get the same answer in Japan as you would in Africa.
That's partly because there's an agreement to learn how to disagree, so that you can learn from somebody who disagrees with you.
Yeah, but the point I was trying to make is the truths that they come up with, or the facts that they come with, are verifiable, no matter where you are. So they tend to congregate on the same information. Rather in religion, they just misinterpret it or disinterpret it or reinterpret it and just keep splitting off and getting more and more different churches.
Would you agree that in good science, a scientist will present his paper in the hope that somebody can find flaws in it so you can improve on it?
Well, sure.
You try to falsify your theory in the hope that you can even get a better theory. And I think that is, that's how knowledge develops. I mean, if I agreed with everything I believed when I was 20, I mean, I can't even remember all of it.
Yeah, yeah. I hate it when my wife corrects me, and she does it all the time. But at the same time, I get good information when she does. If I'm wrong, I'd like to know about it. So that's the way you get
you don't,
better.
Yeah, you don't want to marry your carbon copy. That wouldn't be a marriage.
Right.
It wouldn't even be a good merger.
Yeah.
Well, so would you agree then that that disagreement in a calm, respectful manner is to our self-interest?
Sure, absolutely.
And learning then how to seek out criticism. One of my favorite philosophers actually welcomed criticism. And I like that attitude about it. He said, this is Karl Popper, he said, write clearly so that if you're wrong, it can be quickly detected. I like that attitude about it.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is always telling the story of one of his professors that he had when he was in college. And one of his college mates had gotten up and given a lecture about the material that his professor had been using, but he just proved it. And the professor came up after the class and said, I have been wrong for 20 years. I can't thank you enough for telling me what is correct about this particular thing.
Yeah, that takes quite a man.
It takes quite a man, but it's also the best attitude if you can do that. And of course, he was man enough to do that, which is great.
I had a secretary once, and I still can't type. My two fingers just don't communicate. And the secretary was a whiz. She could type up my stuff faster than I could think it. And I said, now, when you find things that just don't make sense, put a bracket and say, this doesn't make sense, or, He said, I think I mentioned this to you. She said, well, you're a professor. I can't. I said, that's why I do need your help. I said, when I get up and present my papers, I don't want to sound like a total fool.
And I do want to be understood. And if she doesn't understand it, it's a good chance that they will.
Well, she proved to be very helpful to me, and I was very grateful to her.
Let me take just a second to remind our audience, this is a call-in show. The number at the bottom of the screen, lines are open. Your calls are welcome. And call in and correct us if we're wrong. So, fulfillment, self-fulfillment, self-sacrifice for others. You'll see all of that in the Bible, but sometimes the stories themselves are pretty grotesque.
Yeah, the Bible can be self-correcting too
if they would let it. That's the thing, when you take a book and say this is holy and it's the everlasting eternal Word of God, there's no correcting.
Yeah,
and even if you were able to promulgate a beneficial interpretation of it this generation, the book's still going to be their next generation, and the next, and the next, and then they can turn it around and send it right back to the Dark Ages again.
Well, would you agree? Are we on now?
We are on now.
Okay, good. We have literature like Shakespeare. Now, very few people say, well, Shakespeare is the last word in everything. But we read Shakespeare because there's a lot of wisdom in Shakespeare, a lot. In fact, I had a professor once who asked, he was 94, and I said, what are you doing with your life? What are you reading? He said, I've been reading Shakespeare again. He says, this guy's got a lot on the ball. Now, he'd read him, years ago, but he really, now this is a guy who knew his Greek and Hebrew. He was a good scholar, but he had enough sense to realize that Shakespeare was someone he could still learn from. And all ancient literature, including the Bible, is something we can learn from if we use our brains.
Yeah, not only that, but he's a different man than he was when he read it earlier.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
So he's open to more nuance and interpretation than he was at that time.
Yeah, I often read a Bible or any book more than once, 2 or 3 times, and I wonder sometimes, where was I the first time when I read this? Didn't I see this?
Yep.
Okay, on self-love then, let's see if we can define love real simply. To love someone, including yourself, is to care about the health and the happiness and the freedom and the Well, the prosperity.
It's also, you could say, it's an emotional investment that you have in another person.
And I like the way you put that. Yeah, another person is an investment. I mean, I really would hate to be just alone in the world. In fact, I talked to a widow not long ago. She wasn't quite as old as I am, but she was pretty old, white-haired. I'm just envious she had that much hair.
No.
But she said to me and to my wife, the worst thing after her husband's death is the silence around the house. And I never thought about that, you know. I mean, when I saw on her face, it really was a painful thing that you couldn't talk to somebody and get a response.
Yeah.
And that's what talking is to. It's not talking to the wall, because you don't listen when you do that. And she was saying, in effect, it was the dialogue.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And that's, without dialogue, sometimes we talk to ourselves. It's because we have to have dialogue.
Or with books too, you can always get another person's opinion. You won't be able to give them yours, but you can still have a kind of a dialogue going with the author.
Yeah.
And there's an old analogy of a time machine, where this right here is this person's talking to you from the past, and some people are talking to you over the bridge of thousands of years.
Yeah.
And it's that other that fills the gap.
Yeah. I don't know about you, when I read a book, I write. I talk to.
Yeah, I always mark it up when I do.
And sometimes I go back and I read my own comments and try to figure out what in the heck was I talking about.
What was I thinking?
Yeah. So in that sense, interaction is a part of being a self. Without others, we really wouldn't be a self, even if you could get somehow born without a mother.
And that self is always in the construction stage, always.
Yeah.
And
That's a good point, yeah.
Interaction with other being helps supply you with the building materials to build that self. And that construction process slows almost to a crawl if you have to spend all your time alone.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't read and watch TV all the time.
Yeah. When you were growing up, did your parents say to you, make something of yourself?
Sure.
Yeah, and build character? I mean, I think that was your point, is that we are in a process, and other people help us build our character and help us. And they also tell us where some of the material we're building with is bad material. Take it away and
some of us have more material than others, too. So.
Change the subject. Okay, well, if you're out there, call in. We'll be real happy.
Yeah, we have 12 minutes left, so we could probably
hear
take
from you.
A good 10-minute conversation.
By the way, the origin of the Christmas trees, some think that some of the pagans thought trees had spirits and so Martin Luther and others cut down trees, and in other words, they took a tree that the pagans would make something of, and they made it a part of their celebration without the theology of the pagans. They reworked it, and we do the same today. We don't say, well, all the past is foolish. We say much of the past is wisdom and foolishness, and that's true of me, only I haven't figured out which is which sometimes. That's why I need other people to help me.
That's true. Isn't there a passage in the Bible or two that says, don't bring a tree into the house and decorate it?
I don't know of a passage like that. I'd like to be able to find it, but I don't know of any.
I'll look it up and try to have it next time.
Get a concordance and look under tree or house or something.
Yeah. I like to use, there's a website called Blue Letter Bible.
Yeah.
That has a real good concordance and a good search engine. So.
Well, the Christmas present theme then goes way back. In fact, I think you can make a case that this is how tribes sometimes dealt with each other, is they would leave presents and leave. I mean, they'd put it on the boundary of the tribe that they may be at war with.
Like the Trojan horse.
Yeah. Only that one's not a kind of present, but it's the opposite of the Trojan horse.
Yeah.
In other words, you open up the horse, and there are really presents there, not your enemy going to destroy you. It's the opposite.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the origin of in some ways, of capitalism, in the best sense of the word, is you leave a gift, and maybe the people you left it with want more of it, and you start
you've invested your own time, energy, and materials into something that you've created, and then you give that to another person. That's quite a selfless act.
It is a selfless.
And other person hopefully would recognize your sacrifice on that.
And then that person may then, by the same token, say, well, here's a gift back. And after a while, they start bartering. And this is good for both, because these people can say, well, we'll work harder on this.
Okay.
Now we have a caller.
Okay, well, you're on the air. Welcome to Freethought Forum. May we have a name or a nickname, please?
Yes, this is Within Reason.
You're going to have to say your name again, please.
It's Within Reason.
Oh, Within Reason. Welcome to the show. Do you have a comment or question?
I just wanted to say Happy Festivus.
Thank you. Thank you.
The holiday for the rest of us.
We all
happy holidays to you as well.
And to Larry Rhodes and Dr. Barnhart. I hope you have a great show. Are you going to plan something for a Christmas show or something?
Well, we're kind of talking about that today, so we may have to consider this our Christmas show. We will have a show next week, but the subject is still to be determined, so we may throw some Christmas at you then.
But out of love for our audience, Larry and I will guarantee you we won't sing.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we could bring somebody else in who can sing. I sing a lot around the house, and my wife calls it a joyful noise to the Lord.
Have you guys touched on the pagan aspect of Christmas?
Now, we touched a little bit.
About it.
Go ahead, give us some of your ideas. We'd like to hear it.
Oh, no, you guys have the ideas. I wanted to hear it from you guys.
Well, the origin of the mistletoe. Let's see, read this, would you?
This is Norse mythology. Norse mythology recounts how the god Balder was killed using a mistletoe arrow by his rival god Hoder while fighting for the female Nanna. So it must be somebody's grandmother. Druid rituals use mistletoe to poison the family sacrificial victim. Interesting. The Christian custom of kissing under the mistletoe is later synthesis of the sexual license of Saturnalia with the Druidic sacrificial cult. So,
one of those is called "Love You to Death."
Oh my goodness!
But only the kissing part was apparently good. The rest of it was all about murder and poison.
But a lot of the tradition, I think all cultures have learned the importance of gift giving. Because there have been a lot of studies of cultures that are based on envy and how destructive envy can be. And envy is different somewhat from jealousy. Envy means you want to pull somebody down because you want what they have. And the opposite of that is simply giving freely just because you get some joy in helping someone else. And that helps both the giver and the receiver. And that passage in the Bible, it's more blessed to give than to receive. I won't go that far, but it's equally blessed, I think. And in some cases, it is more blessed to give than to receive. Depends on the situation.
What would you determine the word blessed to mean?
Blessed there simply means contribute to the pleasure and happiness and the well-being of another person.
A lot of people would interpret that as meaning blessed by God. If you use the word bless, you're bringing in God. Are you not?
Well, let's suppose there were a God. If he's going to bless you, it's got to do you some good. Otherwise, it's not a blessing. And you want to know, what's he get out of it?
No,
what does she get out of it?
Kind of thought of it that way, and I thought hopefully there'd be a different interpretation of the word that I could go forward with. So that's good to know.
Yeah, well, I think the word itself just means you want someone to have happiness. Whether there's a God or not, it'd be irrelevant.
Yeah.
I would agree.
Thank you. Anything else you have to contribute?
I appreciate your time very much. I'll let somebody else call.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the show.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Lines are open. We have about 5 minutes left in the show. Excuse me.
Well, if nobody's calling in, we'll wait. But what I want to emphasize, and I think you might agree, is that joy and happiness are what we're after. We don't seek pain for its own sake.
We put it in the preamble of the Constitution.
Yeah, life and liberty and the pursuit
of happiness.
And we've learned then that pursuit of my happiness includes the happiness of other people. I'd like to have a hymn called Praise Mothers from Whom Many Blessings Flow. Because we sometimes, and the older I get, I realize there are people in my past I wish I had been more attentive to their needs and their happiness. In particular, I have one aunt that was good to me, and her husband died, and as I think back now, I don't know what I was thinking. I should have said to my wife, let's move her from Tennessee to Texas, just 1,000 miles, and she could have a good home. She moved with her children, and I guess she was happy, but I should have at least given her the option. Yeah. And I just didn't think of it.
It's hard to get to our age without a few regrets.
Yeah, and that's a big regret I have, because she was so good to me when I was a boy. In fact, all of us remember people who were good to us.
That would have been a selfless act on your part.
It would have been selfless, but
also selfish.
It's self-fulfillment.
Yeah. And that too, because you would have enjoyed her company.
She would have been a wonderful to have, and would have been good for the kids. So it was a stupid decision not to do it.
Well, it's the best decision you made at the time. I mean, you had a lot of other things going on. I'm sure there were other pressures. But if you're out there and you have an aunt that needs you.
I was lucky growing up to have a lot of aunts and uncles who were incredibly nice.
Me too.
To me, I could even enjoy aunts and uncles when I was 16. And And if you think back of the number of friends and people you've had to enrich your life, that's something to be, to be grateful for.
Right. You wanted me to remind you when we had about 2 minutes left in the show. Did you have something at the end that you wanted to bring up?
I wanted to make sure that we emphasize celebration of our lives, and celebration of each other. And people have different ways of celebrating. One of which is simply a lot of people eat together, and I think that's that so-called communion that churches have developed. That's what that was basically about. And now the priests turned into a big Eucharist in which they eat the body and blood of Christ and all of that, and then back to cannibalism again.
Cannibalism.
But basically, the early Christians just got together and shared meals with each other, and that's what. Whether you're an atheist or a Hindu or a Buddhist, just to get together and to share. And food is, you break bread and by breaking it means you're already sharing it. So what I'm suggesting, and I think you'd agree, is unselfishness, in that sense of the word, is a part of self-interest. And so we have a narrow self, would you say, which is close to selfishness. And the broader self is when you include the interest and the happiness of other people, and that creates more happiness for us. Now, sometimes it creates more pain, because when someone's dear to you is in pain, we feel it. But nevertheless, that still is enriching who we are. And that's why we use the word empathy, to feel the other people's feelings.
Compassion.
And all cultures have had something like the golden rule. Well, I want to thank our audience. Go ahead.
Thank you for watching. We're down to our last few minutes, our last minute. Let me find the closing.
We got disorganized, didn't we?
Yep. Time to start wrapping things up. This has been Freethought Forum, a program by the Atheist Society of Knoxville and the Rationalists of East Tennessee. Please send us feedback. You can leave voicemails at 865-272-9060 or email us at freethought@yahoo.com. Freethought Forum, at yahoo.com. And you can see the shows every Tuesday from 5 to 6 o'clock on ctvknox.org and on Channel 12 cable locally. We'd like to send our thanks out to Sam, Jonas, and Forrest for technical support, and to the staff at CTV Knox, and to all our callers. Remember, examine your beliefs. If they are real, you have nothing to fear from examination. You'll only